The global financial crisis, which began in 2008, created a deluge of regulation in the EU and the US. Within the EU alone, some 40 legislative proposals, together with radical institutional reform. The changes have sought to restrain the activities of institutions by imposing revised, by which I mean generally higher, capital and prudential requirements. The remuneration of individuals has been put under the spotlight, recognizing the fact that the way people are incentivized financially in the workplace has a predictable relationship to how they will behave. Structural change in regulation has seen a revision in the way regulation is carried on across Europe with the creation of the new European supervisory authorities. A new European Systemic Risk Board has also been established with responsibility for macroprudential oversight of the EU financial systems and to, and I quote, contribute to the prevention or mitigation of systemic risks so as to avoid periods of widespread financial distress. Jonathan Hill, the new European Commissioner for Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union, must have a very large business card to carry his job title and very broad shoulders to carry the workload. He signalled that whilst the challenge to financial stability for the last 5 years has come from the financial crisis, the biggest threat now comes from the lack of growth and jobs. He's also said that the new Commission will regulate less, preferring instead to concentrate on doing a smaller number of things better. All of this will be welcome news to financial market participants who've been struggling for a long time now with the implementation of the new regulatory requirements. It's welcome news, but of course there is still much to do. Only this week, ESMA has published the final technical standards for MiFID II, the Market Abuse Regulation, and the Central Securities Depositories Regulation. And these three documents, taken together, amounts to some 800 pages of text. Commissioner Hill has also said that it's now time to consider whether the regulations implemented after the crisis have met their respective objectives and whether, taken together, they create a coherent package of regulation. After all, it was all done in some haste. And of course, as well as looking backwards, it's important to look forwards and ask whether all of the necessary regulatory changes have indeed been put in place or whether there are still unacceptable gaps in the regulatory system. Our two panel sessions today are intended to add to the debate on these points. Our first session will look back at regulation that has been introduced, whilst the second will take a more forward-looking perspective. In reality, though, it's not always possible to separate backwards from forwards in this particular debate, but that will be our starting point. And we hope that our discussions will help frame the work that the Commission will do in analysing the impact of regulation in the context of the Capital Markets Union. You'll be aware that yesterday the Commission published its action plan, happily just in time for me to be able to print it in order to read it on the Eurostar on the way over. In the UK and in other countries, the financial crisis has begun a debate about two important subjects: the accountability of individuals and the importance of culture. On the former, the UK is in the process of introducing for banks and for other significant firms a new senior managers regime, which is intended to make firms be much more open about which of their executives is responsible for what. The idea is that this transparency will drive accountability. If things go wrong in a particular area of the business, the firm's own records should reveal who is responsible so that action can be taken against them. This would put right for the future the feeling that nobody was found responsible for causing the financial crisis. There has been much discussion on that point in the media in the UK and elsewhere. Culture, also a matter of considerable importance to regulators. I think it's fair to say that it's the holy grail of regulation. If you can get people to behave responsibly as a matter of course, then by definition, firms, as collections of people, will also behave responsibly. Unfortunately, culture does not seem, to me at least, to be an area where regulation can directly influence matters. Yes, you can create a rule to say that you must have a responsible culture, but defining what that means is a very different matter and will legitimately differ between firms. I also want to say something about conduct risk, which is intimately linked to culture. The concept of conduct risk, which is now an international concept, began in the United Kingdom and arose essentially from the financial crisis, where the UK regulator suddenly felt very small indeed. In 2008, the Financial Services Authority, had something in the order of 2,500 staff. Yet the firms it regulated employ somewhere in the region of 1 million people. And as banks began to fail and require bailouts in the UK and across the world, the FSA realized that unless firms are able to regulate themselves, there would be a problem. It is simply impossible to operate a catch-me-if-you-can regulatory model for financial services with firms trying to get around the rules and the regulator trying to catch them. So from this idea, conduct risk was born. Conduct risk is about firms understanding what risks they present as firms to consumers and financial markets. It's about making senior managers understand that they're responsible for the predictable outcomes of the actions in the way that they lead their firm.